for the details of this latest ceasefire proposal. Kimberly, we heard a very solemn President Biden there announcing this latest ceasefire proposal that he said was announced by Israel, proposed by Israel. Talk us through the details of it.
Yeah, the proposal that he says, I know some in Israel will not agree with this plan. He's urged the Israeli leaders to stand behind this deal. I asked them to step back and think about what happens if we lose this moment, suggesting that Israel will be isolated if it does not go ahead with this proposal. The deal seems to be broken down into 3 different phases, and it would be phased in over 6 weeks. The first phase of it would be to end the hostilities, would be a full withdrawal of the Israeli military. The second phase would be critical in that it would be a release of the captives, the Israeli captives that are being held in Gaza in exchange for Palestinian prisoners that are in Israeli jails, hundreds of them that we know are being held in captivity. Then the third phase would involve the rebuilding of Gaza. This would be significant given the widespread damage that has occurred, as well as 600 trucks of aid. Now, obviously, there's going to be need for more aid than that. So I think this was a daily number because we know the goal right now has been less than half that. So this is the United States saying that this needs to be increased significantly. Now, what you're hearing from the U.S. president is that in trying to do this, this would be, if this is achieved over 6 weeks, that this could be turned into something lasting and enduring. In other words, this would be the complete and end and finality to hostilities. In other words, this would bring a cessation to all of the fighting that has been going on. In other words, this is something that would be lasting and enduring, something that the United States has been trying to achieve.
Yeah, and in listening to the president there, Kimberly, it's clear that he wants to bring this war to an end, doesn't want it to drag on in the lead up to the elections in November.
Yeah, and what you heard there is the president kind of dangling the carrot, if you will, for Israel by saying that, look, if you don't, you're going to be isolated, saying that this will allow you to integrate, talking about what this means, the opportunity with working with the Arab neighbors and how this could lead to broader stabilization in the broader Middle East. And so what you've got there is the president looking beyond, even beyond his term, if you will, already laying the groundwork for what he hopes he can do if he is reelected, and also laying down that one message that Hamas needs to take this deal as well.
OK, Kimberly, thank you very much for the moment. Kimberly Halkett, live for us there at the White House. Let's now get the view, the perspective, the Israeli perspective, and speak to Sara Khairat, who's joining us from Amman in Jordan because Israel has banned Al Jazeera in Israel. Sara, President Biden saying there that it is Israel which has offered this new ceasefire deal, but also said, as Kimberly pointed out there, that there are those in Israel, in the Israeli cabinet, who will not agree to this proposal.
Yeah, his speech was really interesting because when there was a ceasefire deal that did go through back in November, it lasted 10 days. And at the time, they talked about potentially 3 phases to get to a point where the war would end. But since then, these negotiation deals haven't happened. There's been a toing and froing between the Israelis and then the Hamas, and each one accusing the other of not abiding by the details or not agreeing to them. And certainly the difference with this speech this time is clearly the message was directed to the leadership of Israel. In fact, Joe Biden even mentioned some of those ministers within the government, he said, that want the Israelis to remain in Gaza for many years to come. Some of those ministers, he didn't mention their names, but it's public knowledge that ministers like Itamar Ben-Gvir, the national security minister, and Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, Minister, who are very open in what they say about wanting Palestinians to choose to leave voluntarily from Gaza. And those are people that want to resettle Gaza, reoccupy Gaza. And it's because of those ministers in the Israeli government that has led Israel to being condemned internationally, with many countries turning against Israel when it comes to calling on them to end this war. Another thing he said is people in Israel will not agree with this plan. So he's referring to those politicians and those divisions that are in the government. He also says in the coalition government, he then says, I urge leadership in Israel to stand behind this deal despite those objections. A message towards Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has almost had his arm twisted by those far-right ministers, because without those ministers, without those parties, that coalition government could potentially fall and new elections would need to happen. And of course, there are calls against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to resign as soon as possible, not just for the failures of October 7 happening in the first place, but also by families angry, protesting in the Knesset against him, saying you must accept a deal no matter what that deal is. Folly, if you remember, all for all was the word that has been used for many months now, where the families of those held captive were calling on any deal if it means ending the war to allow those held captive to return back home.
Sara, thank you very much for that. Sara Khairat live there in Amman, Jordan, because, again, the Israeli government has banned Al Jazeera from reporting from inside Israel, so we have to do it from Amman. Let's now head over to Gaza.